They said it had always been there. The tree with a trunk wide enough to swallow a pickup truck, roots that cracked pavement, limbs that stretched over rooftops like an ancient hand. In the heart of Ash Hollow, it loomed, patient and persistent. But something changed. It started as a whisper among children. Tommy Griggs, 9 years old and perpetually muddy-kneed, was the first to say it out loud. "It's growing," he told his mother one October morning. "The trunk's bigger, way bigger." She laughed it off. Trees grow, after all. But when he dragged her by the hand to the town square where the tree stood, tall, solemn, seemingly timeless, she paused, her brow furrowed. The base, once easily encircled by the old wrought-iron fence, now pressed against it. The metal bent outward, subtle but undeniable. The town called the tree the Hollow Heart. No one remembered when the name first appeared. It had always been the Hollow Heart, like the name chose itself. It was part of Ash Hollow's charm, a centerpiece for fall festivals, summer concerts, and Christmas lighting ceremonies. Kids climbed it, couples carved initials into its bark, and elders sat in its shade to swap stories nobody believed. But now, it pulsed. Before we uncover the secret hidden within this ancient trunk, don't forget to subscribe for more mysteries that defy explanation. At first, people thought it was the weather. A warm winter, a wet spring, maybe it encouraged extra growth. But the tree had been around for centuries. It shouldn't have been growing this fast, not now, not like this. Tommy started spending more time near it. He'd sit on the edge of the fountain that circled the base, watching, waiting. He'd touch the bark and whisper things. His mother scolded him, said he was creeping people out, but Tommy said the tree talked to him. He didn't hear it with his ears exactly, more like inside his chest. Others began to notice. The swelling wasn't subtle anymore. Weekly photos taken by tourists started to circulate online. The change was measurable. The tree had grown nearly 4 inches in circumference in under a year. And then came the vibrations. It was slight, just beneath the soles of your feet when you stood close. Like a hum. Some thought it was traffic or trains in the distance, but Ash Hollow had no trains, and it wasn't traffic. There were days the streets were quiet and the hum still came. Local cafe owners started saying their mugs rattled on the shelves. Something was off. Mayor Clarendon brushed it aside. "Trees grow, that's what they do," he said on local news. No cause for alarm. But privately, he requested the town maintenance crew reinforce the iron fence around the trunk. They added concrete footers. It didn't help. The roots kept pushing. Eleanor Reed, a journalist from Chicago, was visiting her parents for the first time in years. She'd left Ash Hollow behind after college, convinced the sleepy town would smother her dreams. But something about that old tree tugged at her curiosity. The morning after she arrived, her father said, "You heard about the tree? Things ballooning like it's pregnant with the devil." She laughed until she saw it. Eleanor stood in front of the Hollow Heart and felt it. That hum, that low throb that ran through the soles of her feet and up into her ribs. The bark, once rough and dry, had turned warm to the touch. She pulled her hand back instinctively. Tommy appeared beside her like a shadow. "It's getting ready," he said. Eleanor crouched down, puzzled. "Getting ready for what?" Tommy looked up, eyes wide. "To open." The word hit her like a gust of cold wind. Open. As if this wasn't just a tree but a container. Something sealed. Something waiting. And suddenly Eleanor Reed, hardened by years in the city, couldn't look away. Eleanor couldn't sleep that night. The hum she felt beneath her shoes lingered in her memory, an itch beneath the skin that wouldn't go away. Something about that tree was wrong, but it was the boy, Tommy, and his words that haunted her. "It's getting ready to open." Children say strange things, sure. But he hadn't been joking. He hadn't even been scared. He had been certain. The next morning, fog clung to Ash Hollow like a damp sheet. Eleanor walked back to the square, coffee in one hand, notebook in the other. The town was quiet. The Hollow Heart stood as it always had. But now she noticed things she hadn't before. The soil around the base was cracked, dry despite last night's rain. The bark pulsed with warmth, faint but undeniable. Tommy was there again, crouched low near one of the larger roots, fingers tracing lines in the dirt. Eleanor approached slowly. "Didn't expect to see you again," she said. He looked up and gave a half smile. "I knew you'd come back." She crouched beside him. "You said it was getting ready to open." "What did you mean by that?" Tommy shrugged, but not like he didn't know, more like it was too big to explain. "It's just what it feels like. I dream about it. There's something inside." Eleanor frowned. "Inside the tree?" Tommy nodded. "It talks sometimes. Not like people, more like pictures in your head, feelings. You'll see." It was absurd. She knew that. And yet, her hands trembled. She remembered playing here as a child, climbing those roots, hiding behind the trunk during hide and seek. It had always been safe, ordinary. But now, looking at it with adult eyes and a journalist's instinct, she saw what she had missed before. This wasn't growth. It was swelling, pressure, containment. She took out her phone and started recording. Tommy watched her. "People won't believe you." "I don't care," she said. "I just want to know the truth." Later that day, Eleanor visited the library. The local librarian, Mrs. Langley, still wore her glasses on a chain and still remembered everyone's name. She remembered Eleanor too. "Back for the holidays?" she asked, guiding her through the dusty rows of town records. "Something like that," Eleanor replied. "Do we have any historical records about the tree in the square?" Mrs. Langley raised a brow. "The hollow heart? Plenty. Everyone's written something about it. Most of it's legend, though, not much fact." "I'll take legend," Eleanor said. "For now." She spent hours combing through yellowed pages, brittle newspapers, faded photographs. The tree had always been there, or so it seemed. The earliest mention she could find dated back to 1851, a drawing of the town centre with a young, thin tree at the edge of a public gathering. By 1870, it had doubled in size. Local newspapers spoke of strange dreams and gatherings near the tree. One letter to the editor from 1883 described the tree as alive in ways beyond nature. But none of it was clear. Hints, whispers, no substance. She copied what she could, took notes, snapped photos of the oldest records. Something inside her had clicked, not just curiosity, a pull. She needed to understand what this tree was, what it was hiding. That night she returned home and found Tommy sitting on her front steps. "You shouldn't be here," she said, surprised but not angry. "I had to come," he said. "It showed me something again." Eleanor knelt beside him. "What did you see?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "There's a door in the tree, not like one you open. It just happens when it's ready. And it's almost ready." Eleanor stood, heart pounding. She looked out toward the square. The tree loomed even from here, its branches like black veins against the darkening sky. The air felt charged, electric. Something was happening in Ash Hollow, and Eleanor Reed was going to find out what it was, no matter what it cost. The next day began with frost clinging to the windows, but by noon the air felt strangely warm. Unnaturally so. Eleanor walked through Ash Hollow's centre, the warmth intensifying as she neared the tree. The square was empty, save for a few passing glances from townsfolk who kept their distance. No one stayed near the hollow heart for long anymore. As Eleanor stepped closer, she felt it again, that hum, low and rhythmic, like a deep heartbeat under the soil. The bark, darkened and thick, had a sheen to it now, almost moist. She placed her hand on it. Whispers, not voices, not quite. More like murmurs in her mind, sensations crawling behind her thoughts. For a moment it felt like she was underwater, surrounded by the echo of words she didn't understand. She pulled her hand back, gasping. "You heard it, didn't you?" The voice behind her startled her. It was Marla Jones, white hair braided down her back, a wool shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. She stood with a crooked cane, her eyes sharp and watchful. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I think so. First time's always strange. It gets worse the more you listen." "You've heard it too." Marla stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the swelling bark. "I've heard it for years. Tried to warn people once. No one listened then. They won't listen now." "What is it?" Eleanor asked, heart still pounding. Marla turned to her. "You're the reporter, aren't you? Came back from the big city, poking around again?" "I just want to know what's going on." Marla's lips tightened. "It's not growing. It's waking." Eleanor waited, but Marla said no more. Instead, she limped to the bench nearby and sat with a grunt. "This town was built around that thing," she continued, staring at the tree. "Not by accident. People thought it was a miracle. Fertile land, good rain, gentle seasons. They never wondered why, just accepted it." Eleanor listened, scribbling notes. "But that tree, it's not just a tree. Never was. There's something old in it, something buried, wrapped in bark and memory. You said people wouldn't listen before. What happened?" Marla's fingers curled tightly around her cane. "Back in '56, there was a crack down the side. A boy disappeared for 2 days. When he came back, he couldn't speak, just stared. Drew things, ugly things, like roots with faces. We patched over it, pretended it was just trauma. But I knew better." Eleanor felt a chill rise through her. "And now it's starting again?" Marla nodded. "This time it won't be so subtle." Later that evening, Eleanor interviewed other townspeople. Some refused to talk. Others dismissed her with nervous laughs. But the pattern was there. Strange feelings, odd dreams, animals avoiding the square, a sense of being watched near the tree. It wasn't just her. Something was happening. Tommy's mother, hesitant at first, admitted her son had changed. "He talks in his sleep. Always the same phrase, 'it's almost time,' over and over." Eleanor returned home that night with a recorder full of strained voices and a notebook filled with fragmented sentences. None of it concrete, all of it unsettling. That night, she dreamt of wood and fire. She stood inside the tree, its walls pulsing like flesh. Whispers filled the air, rising to a chorus. Shapes moved beyond the bark, reaching, pressing. A face emerged, twisted, ancient, watching her through a veil of sap. She woke, gasping, drenched in sweat. The next morning, she didn't go to the cafe or the library. She went straight to the tree. She stood before it as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the square. And this time, she whispered back. Eleanor returned to the library with a sharper focus. The whispers, the dreams, Marla's warning, it all pointed backward into the town's forgotten history. If there were answers, they were buried in ink and dust. Mrs. Langley greeted her with a raised brow. "You're persistent," she said, unlocking the archive room again. "Just be careful with the older files. Some of those haven't been touched in decades." The room smelled of mildew and brittle pages. Eleanor set to work, combing through town council notes, land records, and early newspapers. She scanned microfilm reels, flipped through fragile books, and pored over handwritten letters filed in misaligned drawers. The first real clue came in the form of a journal entry dated April 17th, 1875. It was written by Eliza Bancroft, a settler and schoolteacher. The entry was shaky but legible. "Today I saw the tree swell again. The children say it speaks to them in their dreams. Young Clara refuses to go near it. She says there are faces in the bark." Eleanor underlined the last sentence, "faces in the bark." Another entry, just 2 days later, detailed an outbreak of illness in the town. Fevers, delirium, fits of screaming at night. But no mention of quarantine, no formal response from officials. It had been quietly dismissed. Then came a folded, yellowed article from the Ash Hollow Gazette, dated July 1875. The headline read, "Midsummer Festival cancelled amid unrest." The body of the article described rising tensions in the town, superstitions growing, people leaving. The word curse was used, mockingly, but it was there. Most intriguing was a single line buried near the end. Some speak of a buried structure beneath the town square, a cellar or vault from before the founding. Stories passed down from the Shawnee people, ignored by settlers. The tree now grows above it. Eleanor sat back. A buried structure, a vault. She found a map, one of the earliest surveys of the town. The square was marked, but a faint, almost erased circle rested just beneath the drawing of the tree's original sapling. It was labeled in delicate, fading script. Foundation remains, original marker site. That night she brought her findings to Marla. The old woman studied the map and the copied documents in silence. They called it a vault, Eleanor said. Do you know what that means? Marla looked at her, and for the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. They buried something, or tried to, something they didn't understand. Thought a tree would be strong enough to hold it. Do you believe that? Eleanor asked. That there's something down there? I don't believe, Marla whispered. I remember. Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. What do you mean? I was 12. My brother and I used to play near the roots. We'd sneak out at night, dare each other to touch the trunk. One night, I put my ear against the bark. Heard breathing, not like wind or insects, real slow breathing. When I told my parents, they beat me for lying. She paused, hands trembling slightly. Weeks later, a man vanished. Everyone said he ran off, but I saw him walk into the tree. Eleanor didn't respond, couldn't. Marla folded the map carefully, slid it back across the table. You're not going to stop, are you? No, Eleanor said. Not now. Marla gave a thin smile. Then be smarter than the rest of us were. Don't just look at what's there. Ask what's been hidden. Eleanor nodded, gathering her notes. She glanced out the window, where the outline of the hollow heart rose dark against the starlit sky. It wasn't just a tree anymore. It was a lid. By the end of the week, the tree had changed again. The bark was no longer uniform. Thick ridges bulged along its surface, some curling like knotted veins, others forming strange angular shapes that hadn't been there before. People noticed, though they didn't say it aloud, but every glance lingered longer. Every passerby walked a little faster. Eleanor spent her mornings watching it. She took photos, catalogued measurements, compared them to old images she found online. One caught her attention, a tourist's snapshot from only 6 months prior. The trunk looked smooth by comparison. Now it looked like it was sculpting itself from within. She wasn't the only one who noticed. Tommy stood beside her again that afternoon, silent for a long time. Then he pointed to one of the bark's raised patterns near the base. At first glance, it seemed like another twist of grain, but the longer she stared, the more it resembled something disturbingly familiar. A face. Not detailed, not perfect, but unmistakably human. Eyes closed, mouth slightly open, like someone frozen mid-breath. That one was new this morning, Tommy whispered. Eleanor stepped closer. The wood around the face was warm. Not like sunlight warm, internal warm, like skin, like breath. She pulled out her notebook and sketched it quickly, hands trembling. A sound echoed faintly above. Crows scattered from the highest branches in sudden chaos, cawing as they fled. They hadn't nested there for weeks now. Birds avoided the tree entirely. Squirrels no longer ran its limbs. The animals knew. And they were keeping their distance. That night Eleanor returned after sunset. She brought her recorder and a flashlight. The square was empty, silent. The only sounds were the hum of the distant highway and the rhythmic chirp of crickets until she stepped within 10 feet of the tree. Silence. The crickets stopped. The air shifted. She flicked on her light and examined the bark again. More shapes, not just faces now, hands. Open palms pressed outward from beneath the wood, like something inside wanted out. She leaned in, pressing the recorder near the largest fissure. Nothing. Then, faintly, a whisper. She played it back, heart hammering. It wasn't clear speech, but it was something, a rhythm like a chant or a lullaby in reverse. She didn't understand the words, but she felt them in her chest. It made her nauseous. The next morning the fissures were wider, not cracks, creases, deliberate seams. She touched one. The wood shifted slightly under her fingers, like muscle beneath thin skin. Word spread fast. By midday a small crowd had gathered. People murmured theories, joked nervously, took selfies. But beneath the surface fear simmered. It was too much, too strange. The mayor arrived, flanked by 2 council members. He didn't say much, just shook his head and ordered yellow tape strung around the base. Eleanor watched from the sidewalk. She didn't need to be close anymore. She could feel it from here. Tommy sat on the edge of the fountain again, legs dangling. He didn't look at her as she approached. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "It's louder now, even when I'm not near it." "What does it say?" Tommy turned to her, his face pale. "Names." Eleanor's breath caught. "What names?" He shook his head slowly. "They're not people, not like us." That night, Eleanor developed the photos she'd taken earlier. With digital zoom, she enhanced the faces in the bark. One was clearer than the rest, eyelids carved with eerie precision, a nose flat and wide, the mouth twisted open, not screaming, but grinning. She turned off her monitor and sat back in the dark. The tree was no longer hiding what it was revealing it, and it was doing so on purpose. Eleanor typed the final line of her draft and leaned back. The article wasn't speculation anymore. It was documentation. Dates, photos, interviews, even the audio of the whisper from within the bark. She reviewed the headline one last time. "Ash Hollow's tree may be more than it seems." Then she hit send. The local news didn't respond, neither did the regional editor she'd worked with in Chicago. But by morning the article was live on her personal blog. Within hours it had over 2,000 shares and a wave of comments. Skeptics, conspiracy theorists, the curious. But in Ash Hollow, there was silence. At the diner, people stared at her like she'd broken an unspoken rule. At the grocery store, someone muttered crazy under their breath as she passed. She expected that. What she didn't expect was the meeting request from Sheriff Dale Carter. They met in his office, walls lined with awards and dusty hunting photos. He didn't offer her a seat, just stood behind his desk, arms crossed. "You're stirring panic," he said flatly. "I'm reporting facts," Eleanor replied. "I have photos, witnesses. You're scaring children. They should be scared." Carter's jaw tensed. "We've had prank calls all morning. Kids claiming they saw ghosts in the square. People asking if we need an exorcist. This town's got enough trouble without you making it worse." "Then do something," she said. "Put a team on it. Get a geologist, a botanist, anyone qualified. This tree is not behaving like a tree." He sat down slowly, folding his hands. "Do you know what happens to towns like this when stories like yours catch fire? We get labeled, forgotten. Tourists stop coming. Property values crash. Panic spreads. Then people leave. And if you ignore this, people get hurt," she snapped. "Or worse. You think there's something evil in that trunk? I think there's something alive. Something that doesn't want to stay locked up." He stared at her a long moment, then exhaled through his nose. "I'm placing a perimeter around the tree. No one in or out after dark. Patrol every hour. That's all I'm doing." "It's not enough," Eleanor whispered. "It's more than you'll get from anyone else," he said, then turned his eyes back to his paperwork, ending the conversation. Outside, she found Marla waiting on the steps, wrapped in her coat despite the heat. "He doesn't believe you," Marla said. "Not really. He will, when it's too late." They walked in silence for a few blocks. "You said something once," Eleanor said, "that it gets worse the more you listen." Marla nodded. "I don't sleep anymore. Haven't in years. The tree finds its way in even with my eyes open. Why stay? Because someone has to remember. Everyone else forgets, denies, laughs. But I know what's underneath. I've seen what happens when it opens." Eleanor stopped. "Tell me." Marla's face went pale. "No, not yet." That night the town square was quiet. Police tape fluttered in the wind. A single cruiser circled the block. But the tree stood unchanged, as if oblivious to the tension surrounding it. Eleanor sat on her porch watching it from a distance, unable to look away. Her phone buzzed. Another comment on the blog. This one from an anonymous user. "The hollow heart has roots deeper than memory. Be careful where you dig." She read it twice. Across the street, she saw Tommy standing alone in the dark, staring at the tree. She waved. He didn't move. Then, very slowly, he raised his hand and pointed, not at the trunk, but above it. She followed the direction of his finger. In the highest branch, something moved. A silhouette, too still to be an animal, too large to be wind-blown shadow. When she looked back, Tommy was gone. The next morning, Eleanor knocked on Marla's door before the sun had fully risen. The old woman answered with a sigh, as though she'd been expecting this visit all along. "You saw something," she said. Eleanor nodded. "Not clearly." But it wasn't human. Marla stepped aside without a word and led her to the back room, a dim, cluttered space filled with books older than both of them and a faint scent of cedar and wax. She lit a small oil lamp and placed it between them. "You wanted the truth," Marla said. "So here it is." She opened an aged leather-bound journal and set it gently on the table. The pages were brittle, filled with tight handwriting and symbols Eleanor didn't recognize. "My grandmother gave me this when I was 10, Marla said. "It's not a diary, it's a warning." She turned to a page marked with a strip of red cloth. In the center, a drawing, the tree unmistakable, but its roots extended far below ground, entwined around what looked like a cage of stone. Eleanor leaned in. "That's the vault." "Not a vault," Marla said softly. "A seal, a prison." She tapped another symbol, one shaped like an eye with roots for lashes. "This is the mark of the hollow heart. It's not a name someone gave the tree. It's what it's always been called." "I found a newspaper mentioning Shawnee legends. Could this be—" Marla nodded. "Long before this town, the land was sacred. Not for what it gave, but for what it held back. The Shawnee didn't worship it, they feared it. They said a thing came from beneath, not a spirit, not a god, something other. They bound it using rituals lost to time, and they planted the tree over it to hold the seal." Eleanor felt her throat dry. "And the tree's been holding it ever since." Marla nodded again. "Until now. What happens if it gets out? The land dies, the people change. It doesn't kill the way we think of death. It consumes, twists, possesses. It lives through things, through us." Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. "Why is it opening now?" Marla hesitated. Rituals had to be repeated, every few decades quietly by those who remembered, but people forgot. Or refused to believe. "My grandmother did the last one in 1956. She died before she could teach me everything." Eleanor stood, pacing. "Then it's our fault." "No," Marla said. "It's time. Everything breaks down eventually. Nothing stays sealed forever." Eleanor ran a hand through her hair. "There has to be something we can do, reverse it." "Buy more time." Marla was silent, then opened a drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were 3 bone tokens, carved with the same root-eye symbol. "Only if we act now, before the final breach." Outside, the wind rose suddenly. The windows trembled. The air inside the room thickened like the pressure before a thunderstorm. Eleanor turned to the window. The tree was glowing. Not bright. Subtle, but from within the trunk, thin orange light seeped through the bark seams like molten veins. It pulsed, matching the hum that now reached them even here. Marla stood beside her. "It's not waiting anymore," Eleanor whispered. "Then neither can we." That afternoon she published a second article, one that didn't ask questions but made declarations. She quoted Marla's stories, documented the rituals, showed the symbols. It was a plea, a warning, and a challenge. The comments came faster this time. Mockery, praise, concern. But one reply chilled her. A new username. No profile picture. Just the message. "You're waking it faster." She stared at the screen. Then the house lights flickered. The light spread overnight. By morning, the entire base of the tree glowed with a dull orange hue. Not constant, pulsing like a warning light. The seams in the bark had widened, revealing faint, fibrous layers beneath that shimmered with unnatural moisture. The warmth now radiated feet beyond the trunk. You could feel it just standing on the sidewalk. Sheriff Carter held a press conference at noon. Standing stiffly in front of the cordoned square, he addressed the growing crowd with forced calm. "We are responding to an unexplained natural occurrence," he said. "Out of an abundance of caution, we are closing the entire town square to the public until further notice. Please respect the barrier and remain clear of the area." Eleanor watched from the edge, notebook in hand. There were no questions taken, No mention of her reports, no word about the faces in the bark or the glow. Behind him, the tree throbbed. Later, she approached two of the officers stationed at the edge of the tape. "You've seen what's happening, haven't you?" she asked. They didn't answer, but one of them, the younger one, averted his eyes. That night, Eleanor climbed onto the roof of the library for a better view. She brought her camera, a thermos of coffee, and a radio tuned to the emergency channel. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the first crack echoed through town. It wasn't a branch breaking. It was the tree. The sound was deep and wet and hollow, like stone splitting under pressure. Lights turned on in nearby houses. Dogs began to bark. Eleanor zoomed in with her lens and saw it. One of the seams had split. A narrow gap opened along the southern face of the trunk. Steam rose from within. Not smoke, steam, thick and wet, curling upward like breath from lungs that had waited too long to exhale. She scrambled down and rushed to the square. A small crowd had already gathered, all in robes and coats, barefoot or barely dressed. Drawn to the sound, drawn to the light. Tommy was there too, standing still, eyes wide. "Stay back!" someone shouted, but no one moved. The opening in the tree continued to grow. The crack stretched from root to limb, a glowing wound splitting the bark with slow inevitability. Eleanor stepped closer, passing under the tape. "Don't!" someone yelled, but she didn't stop. She wasn't afraid now, just cold with clarity. This wasn't a natural event. This was a release. Inside the gap, she could see a hollow core glowing with dim red light. It wasn't empty. Shapes shifted behind the glow, unformed things, flickers of movement without edges or sound. Then came the sound, a low vibration like a cello bow dragged across rusted strings. It vibrated in her teeth. Eleanor dropped to one knee, gasping. Others followed, some crying out. One woman began to bleed from her nose. Tommy didn't move. The sheriff arrived minutes later. He barked orders, tried to push people back. One of the officers vomited. Another started praying out loud. Still, the tree opened wider. Finally, Carter drew his weapon and fired. 3 deafening shots. The bullet struck the trunk and vanished inside. No splinters, no reaction. Nothing but a sudden, overwhelming silence that followed, so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Then the tree exhaled. A wave of hot air burst from the crack, knocking Eleanor to the ground. Her ears rang, people screamed. Light poured from the opening like liquid, spilling across the ground and seeping into the grass, the pavement, the soil. The sheriff shouted for an evacuation. Sirens began to wail. Eleanor crawled to Tommy, who was still standing, arms at his sides. She grabbed him, shaking him. "Tommy, we have to go." But he turned slowly to her, eyes glowing faintly orange. "It's here," he whispered. The mist poured from the tree like breath from a lung long held, dense and pulsing, curling across the square in tendrils that clung to the ground. It wasn't just fog. It shimmered with a strange iridescence, catching the light from street lamps and twisting it into shapes that didn't hold. People screamed, some ran, others stood frozen. Eleanor pulled Tommy back, but he resisted, eyes glazed, body slack. The mist reached them and passed through like cold silk. Her skin tingled, her mind stuttered. And then she saw it. Not with her eyes. Something deeper. A memory, not hers. A long tunnel of roots lit from within by shifting amber light. Sounds of wet breathing, rhythmic and slow. She stood at the threshold of a vast chamber carved from living wood, and at the center was a shape. Not a creature, not even a form. Just presence. A pressure, like being underwater beneath something ancient and thinking. She blinked. Reality snapped back. Tommy had gone still again. Around them, people began to murmur. "I saw my mother," someone whispered. "She's been dead 30 years, said another. One man fell to his knees, laughing and crying at once. A woman dropped her phone and stared into the distance, lips moving soundlessly. The mist thickened, and with it, the whispers returned, this time not internal. They came from the air all around, soft and overlapping like dozens of voices, speaking at once in a language that shouldn't exist. Eleanor grabbed Tommy's hand. "We have to get out of here." But the boy turned and looked at her, not through her, but into her. "I don't think we can," he said. The sheriff shouted through a bullhorn, ordering an evacuation. Lights flashed, sirens echoed. But no one moved the way they should. They were dazed, untethered. The mist was doing something to their minds, showing them things, making them forget where they were and what was real. And then someone vanished. It happened fast. A man standing near the fountain took one step into the thickest part of the mist and was gone. No scream, no fall, no sound, just absence. Gasps and shouts followed. People scattered in all directions, stumbling into one another, tripping over benches and planters. The mist responded, rising, twisting, moving like it chose its own path. Eleanor held Tommy close and tried to lead him away. They didn't make it far. A swirl of mist cut them off, and from it stepped a shape. It wasn't solid, not really. A silhouette. Tall, stretched, with limbs that moved like smoke and eyes that burned orange. It walked without touching the ground, and where it passed, the grass wilted to black. Eleanor froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The thing turned toward them, but didn't attack. It simply stared. Then it whispered, not with words but with thoughts. A name filled her mind, though she didn't understand it. A name not meant for human mouths. Tommy stepped forward. "No," Eleanor cried, grabbing his arm. He turned to her calmly. "I have to." And before she could stop him, he stepped into the mist. It swallowed him whole. Gone. She screamed his name, but there was no answer. No sound. Just the hiss of mist slithering across stone. The sheriff arrived seconds later, dragged her away. She fought him, shouting, but he pulled her back beyond the cordon. The mist stopped at the edge of the tape, pulsing, watching. Then, slowly, it began to recede. The people left behind were changed, silent, shaken, eyes vacant. A few began to cry. Others just stared. Eleanor collapsed on the curb, shaking. Tommy was gone. The mist had taken him. And deep inside the tree, something else had stepped closer to the surface. The tree called to her, not with words, not even with whispers anymore, but with a pull, like gravity, drawing her toward it in ways her body couldn't resist. Eleanor didn't sleep. She couldn't, not since Tommy vanished. His face haunted every closed eyelid, his voice echoing with a final calm certainty. "I have to." She stood at the edge of the square, the morning mist still clinging low. The authorities had blocked the area with barriers, but no one guarded it now. After the night of the emergence, the town had changed. People locked their doors, left lights on through the night. Some packed their bags. And some simply sat, staring at the tree, waiting for something they couldn't name. Eleanor stepped over the tape. Each footfall felt heavy, like the ground itself was warning her back. But the trunk loomed larger than ever, its crack still open, wider now, wide enough to enter. The light within had dimmed, no longer glowing but throbbing, like a wound just beneath scabbed skin. She reached the opening and paused. A breeze escaped from inside. It smelled of damp soil, ash, and something older, something like time left to rot. Then she stepped in. Inside was darkness, but not blindness. The air shimmered faintly, lit by veins of soft amber glow that traced along the interior walls like bioluminescent capillaries. The space was larger than it should have been, far larger. It wasn't hollow, it was structured. The inside of the tree pulsed with warmth. The wood under her fingers was soft, almost pliable, like cartilage instead of bark. She moved deeper, following a spiraling corridor that twisted downward. There were markings along the walls, symbols like those in Marla's journal, repeating patterns and deeper carvings that looked burned into the core. She didn't know how far she walked. Time dissolved inside the tree. Eventually she reached a chamber. It was vast and impossible. The walls curved outward and upward, a dome of dark wood slick with condensation. At its center stood a column, twisted, root-like, rising from floor to ceiling. Embedded within its fibers were shapes, human shapes, dozens, some barely visible, others almost free. All frozen in poses of agony or awe, arms outstretched, mouths open in silence, and among them near the base was Tommy. Eleanor rushed forward, heart racing. He stood with eyes closed, hands by his sides, embedded from the knees down in the living root. His skin glowed faintly, and the expression on his face was calm, peaceful, as though he was dreaming. "Tommy," she whispered, reaching out. Before her hand touched him, the tree responded. The chamber lit up, not with brightness, but with presence. She felt it behind her eyes, in her bones. It pressed into her thoughts, rifling through her memories, her fears, her guilt. It showed her. Visions burst into her mind, centuries of containment, of something vast and intelligent buried deep below. Not evil, not good, just other. A thing too large for form, too old for language, something bound by ritual, fed by belief, sustained by reverence or fear. And the people had stopped believing. She saw the breaking of the seal, the thinning of the prison, the hunger of a will that had waited too long to be remembered. Tommy wasn't taken, he had been invited. She collapsed to her knees, gasping. The voice entered her thoughts. Not words, but meaning, witness, bear, bind. The message was clear. She could leave. For now. She touched Tommy's hand. It was warm, alive. She whispered his name again, and for the briefest moment his eyelids twitched. The tree accepted her presence, but it was not finished. She turned and began the ascent back through the spiraling tunnel, heart pounding with the weight of what she'd seen. She had entered the hollow heart, and it had shown her its root. Eleanor didn't tell anyone what she'd seen inside the tree. Not yet. She sat in her parents' kitchen, staring at a cup of tea gone cold. Her fingers twitched, her mind still echoing with the vision, the pressure, the wordless voice. She could still feel the warmth of Tommy's hand. He was alive, but he wasn't just a boy anymore. He was something more, or maybe something less. She didn't know which was worse. The town outside had grown quieter. Fear had settled in like dust, thick and unavoidable. People whispered about leaving, about burning the tree, about praying, though no one dared get too close. The mist had receded, but never fully vanished. At night, it lingered like smoke over the square. Eleanor knew it wasn't over. It was just the eye of the storm. Marla came that afternoon. "You went in," she said, no preamble. Eleanor nodded. "You saw the chamber?" "Yes." "And Tommy?" "Yes." Marla didn't sit. She paced slowly around the kitchen, her steps careful. Her voice, when it came, trembled. "It's not a prison anymore. It's a nursery." Eleanor looked up. "What?" Marla stopped. "Whatever was bound down there, it's not just waiting, it's growing. Through him. Through that root system. Through memory. That's why it needed people. That's why it whispered." Eleanor's thoughts spun. "It's not just breaking free, it's becoming something new." Marla nodded. "And once it's complete, it won't be content to stay under bark." They sat in silence, the truth settling between them like ash. That night, Eleanor returned to the square again. She needed to feel it to understand if something had changed, and she did, immediately. The air wasn't just warm, it buzzed. The tree didn't hum anymore, it sang. A deep, low resonance, barely audible but impossible to ignore. She moved closer, hands trembling. The crack in the trunk had widened slightly, now ringed by root-like growths that pulsed faintly with reddish light. There was no mist, but the ground around the base shimmered faintly, like heat rising from blacktop. She stepped within arm's reach and stopped. The tree responded. A sigh, low, ancient, tired, echoed from within the trunk. The bark shifted, creaked, flexed. She could see the movement behind the outer shell, like tendons stretching beneath skin. Not random, rhythmic. It was breathing again, then from the fissure a whisper, but not the same voice. This was softer, higher, a child's voice. "Eleanor," she gasped. "Tommy?" No answer. She leaned closer, heart thudding. "Help me," the voice said. "Please." She reached toward the opening, and something reached back. Not physically, mentally. A sudden surge of emotion poured through her, fear, loneliness, cold hunger, and an image. Tommy's face, eyes wide with a panic he couldn't express, buried beneath roots that wrapped tighter each time he exhaled. She staggered back, breath ragged. The tree wasn't just growing something, it was consuming, using Tommy's body as a vessel, his mind as scaffolding, feeding off memory, pain, and presence. She ran, back to Marla's. She burst in without knocking, eyes wild. "It's using him," she said, "not keeping him, not protecting, feeding, building. He's the seed. It's growing from him." Marla didn't blink. She walked slowly to a chest in the corner and opened it. Inside were 3 objects: a shallow wooden bowl, a jar of black soil, and a bone-carved knife. "We can stop it," Marla said, voice thin but steady. "But not with words. We have to finish what my grandmother started, the last ritual, the one she didn't complete." Eleanor stared at the items. "What happens if we fail?" Marla looked at her. "Then the boy is lost, and the hollow heart becomes the first." Eleanor swallowed. She thought of Tommy's mother, of his drawings, of the face in the bark and the singing roots. She picked up the bowl. "Then let's finish it." They waited until nightfall. Eleanor and Marla stood in the clearing, a few feet from the tree, cloaked in silence. The square had been abandoned for hours. Most of the town had sealed itself indoors, pretending that ignorance could serve as protection. But the air itself betrayed the truth, dense, metallic, wrong. Marla laid the items out in the dirt, the bowl, the soil, the knife. Her hands moved with practiced precision, though they trembled slightly. Eleanor helped where she could, unsure if her presence helped or hindered. But Marla never hesitated. "We'll need blood," Marla said simply. Eleanor nodded. She took the knife and cut her palm without a word. The blood dripped into the bowl, mixing with the dark soil. Marla whispered in a language Eleanor didn't recognize, something passed down, fractured over generations, but potent in its rhythm. As the chant grew, the air changed. The tree responded. Its song deepened into a drone, and the ground beneath them pulsed with slow, seismic rhythm. The bark along the trunk shifted, faces pressing outward, mouths opening in silence, as though they too remembered this ritual. Eleanor's blood-soil mixture began to steam. Marla dipped her fingers in it and smeared a symbol on Eleanor's forehead, another across her own. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the final piece, a small shard of something translucent and warm. "The seal," she said, "the last fragment. My grandmother kept it hidden, never told me where until a week before she died." Eleanor stared at it. "It's part of the original?" Marla nodded. "We put it back into the root, that's the key." "How do we find the right root?" "We don't," Marla said. "It finds us." Suddenly, the ground cracked. A thin split in the earth slithered between their feet, revealing a glowing tendril, pulsing red and gold. It rose like a serpent, curved toward the shard, then stopped, waiting. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and placed the fragment into the fissure. The tree screamed. Not through sound, but through pressure, the air twisted. Wind surged outward in a circle. The bark flared with light. Roots began to thrash just beneath the surface, tearing through stone and soil. Across town, lights flickered. Dogs howled. People awoke with nosebleeds and memories that weren't theirs. They saw things, glimpses of ancestors, strangers, futures that hadn't come to pass. The hollow heart was bleeding through. Marla fell to her knees. Eleanor grabbed her, held her upright. "Stay with me," she shouted over the roar of the air. Marla's eyes were wide with pain and awe. "It's working. The seal's taking hold again, but it won't hold unless—" "Unless what?" Marla's voice was a whisper. "Unless we give it something to bind to." Eleanor froze. "A sacrifice." Marla nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It needs a tether. Memory for memory. Root for root." Eleanor's mind raced. Her blood was in the bowl. Her memories had been touched by the tree. She understood now. It had to be her. But Marla shook her head. No, the old woman said, smiling faintly. It has to be me. Before Eleanor could stop her, Marla pressed both palms into the glowing fissure. The earth swallowed her hands first, then her arms. She looked at Eleanor one last time. "Finish it," she said, and the tree took her. The light flared, the root shuddered, then pulled back into the ground, dragging the bowl and the symbols with it. Silence crashed down like thunder. The song stopped. The tree went still. Eleanor fell to her knees, weeping. The fissure in the trunk began to seal. Slowly. Gradually. But it was closing. The morning after Marla vanished into the root, Eleanor woke to stillness. Not peace, just a silence so deep it pressed against her skin. Outside, the town lay heavy under a grey sky. No birds, no wind, just the weight of something unfinished. She knew the ritual hadn't worked completely. The fissure had sealed, yes. But the hum remained, faint beneath her feet. The warmth still lingered in the air. Most of all, she knew it because she could still hear the tree, whispers threading through her thoughts like cracks in glass. She wasn't alone anymore. She walked to the square just past dawn. The tree stood unchanged, or so she thought. Then she saw the bark. Where the fissure had once been, the wood was darker, slicker. And in its center was a knot, swollen and pulsing as if trying to break through, like a final splinter held back by the thinnest layer of will. She knew what it was, the last fragment of the seal. It hadn't taken completely. Marla's sacrifice had slowed it, but not stopped it. Something still lived inside, pressing forward, and it wanted out. Eleanor stepped closer, but before she could reach the knot, she felt the pull again, not gravity, not instinct. Memory. The tree opened her mind. She saw herself, years ago on this very square, holding her father's hand. She saw Tommy's drawings, Marla's journal, the faces in the bark, all layered like pages from books she'd never read until now. And beneath it all, something waited. Not cruel, not kind, just vast. A hunger that had learned to wait. Eleanor stumbled back. The knot pulsed harder now, reacting to her presence. Then, cracked. A sliver of bark peeled away. From within, black sap oozed down the trunk, hissing as it hit the earth. The ground beneath her feet buckled slightly. Something beneath was moving. She ran. She didn't make it far. The ground exploded upward near the fountain. Roots burst forth, snapping stone and steel. They rose like skeletal arms, flailing, writhing, then crashing down into the earth again. A wave of force knocked her off her feet. From the rupture, figures emerged, not fully formed, not flesh. Echoes of people, faces twisted by time, expressions locked in agony. They moved without sound, without mass, but left footprints wherever they passed, and wherever they touched, grass blackened, trees withered, light dimmed. She crawled to her feet, stumbling toward the library. Inside, she grabbed the only thing she had left, Marla's journal. She flipped through its pages blindly, searching for anything unfinished, symbols, words, instructions. One line stood out, scrawled in darker ink near the back. When the splinter cannot be sealed, it must be broken, but not with blade, with blood remembered. She didn't understand, until the whispers answered. Witness, bear, bind. She was the last one who remembered it all. The faces, the truths, the fear. She carried the memory now, of the ritual, of the sacrifice, of what had lived beneath the tree for centuries. She was the vessel. Eleanor stood and walked back into the square. The figures didn't follow her. They watched. The tree knew her now. She reached the knot, laid her hand on it. It pulsed once, then again, and cracked. A splinter drove into her palm, sudden and deep. She gasped but didn't pull back. The pain was white-hot, spreading through her veins. The tree took her blood, not to feed, but to learn. Visions exploded behind her eyes. The tree's birth, its binding, every ritual performed, everyone ignored. Generations of memory surged through her body like fire. She screamed. The knot split open. The final splinter fell. But what came next had already begun. The knot burst open with a wet cracking sound, spilling black sap onto Eleanor's feet. But it didn't burn. It shimmered, cool, silken, almost tender. Her breath caught. She stood trembling, blood soaking into the bark beneath her palm. Then the light came. Not from the tree, but from within her. A sudden surge of memory not her own rose like floodwater. Names, places, moments. Long-dead voices filled her mind. Elders chanting, children running through fields, hands pressing against bark in reverence. The full history of the hollow heart unraveled through her veins. The final binding wasn't a weapon. It was remembrance. The tree convulsed. Roots twisted skyward, and the figures that had emerged earlier shrieked, not with sound but with movement erratic and chaotic. Their forms flickered, destabilized. They reached toward Eleanor, but couldn't cross the circle where her blood had touched the ground. The tree wailed. A low, deep bellow from its core echoed across the town, like a bell struck in the marrow of the world. Houses shook. Windows shattered. The ground split again, but this time upward, releasing not mist but air, clean and sharp and alive with memory. Then, from the heart of the trunk, Tommy stepped out. He was barefoot, covered in sap, eyes wide and clear, no glow, no trance, just the boy. He saw Eleanor and stumbled into her arms, sobbing. "I thought I was gone," he whispered. "I thought I was part of it." "You're not," she said, holding him tightly. "You're still you." Behind them, the tree began to shift. The split narrowed. The bark pulled together like stitched skin. The ground settled. Roots coiled inward, retreating beneath the soil. The faces in the bark faded one by one. The air stilled. The song stopped. Then silence. Real, whole, natural silence. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor didn't hear whispers. No hum, no breath, just the wind returning to Ash Hollow. Sheriff Carter arrived minutes later with 3 officers in tow. They stared at the scene, weapons drawn, unsure if they were too late or far too early. Eleanor stepped forward, hands stained red and black. "It's done," she said. Tommy stood beside her, small and silent, clutching her sleeve. Carter looked at the tree, now whole again, scarred but dormant, and slowly lowered his weapon. "What happened?" he asked, not out of duty, but in awe. Eleanor didn't answer, not yet. Instead, she led Tommy home, walking past the cracked pavement and the blackened patches of earth. The town watched from windows, behind curtains and doors. No one stepped outside. The hollow heart had closed. That night, Eleanor sat alone on her porch, the breeze soft against her skin. She didn't cry. She didn't sleep. She watched the tree, and it watched her back. But there was no malice, no hunger, just quiet. Tommy slept in the room beside hers, breathing peacefully. Whatever had grown inside him, whatever had used him, it was gone now. Or maybe it had been satisfied by something deeper, something older than fear. Eleanor opened Marla's journal once more. At the very back, a final entry she hadn't noticed before. Scrawled in delicate, fading ink, "It's not about keeping it buried. It's about remembering what it cost to keep it bound." She closed the book. The tree stood silent in the distance, still massive, still strange, but no longer a threat, a relic, a reminder. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor felt like she belonged, not just in Ash Hollow, but in the story beneath its roots. Eleanor's article went live the next morning. She didn't bury the truth. She laid it bare. Marla's sacrifice, the rituals, the near awakening of something beyond comprehension. She included Tommy's story, anonymized but powerful. The photos, the symbols, the history. It wasn't just a report, it was a testament. Within hours, it was everywhere. Not mainstream media, not yet, but message boards lit up. Paranormal forums dissected every line. Locals sent her messages, some apologizing, others begging for more. But most just said the same thing. "Thank you for remembering." Ash Hollow didn't recover overnight. The soil around the tree remained barren, and parts of the square stayed cordoned off. But no more mist returned, no more figures wandered, and the whispers stopped completely. Tommy drew again, but only trees now, quiet forests. No faces, no roots twisting like claws. He smiled again. The hollow heart still stood in the center of town. Its bark bore the scars of what had passed, dark seams, faded symbols, a single knot that no longer pulsed but remained as a reminder. People came to see it, not as tourists, as pilgrims. They didn't know the full story, but they felt something, a reverence, a weight. Eleanor stayed. She had planned to return to Chicago, to her freelance work, to the noise and the distance. But Ash Hollow no longer felt small. It felt deep, layered, alive in a way cities could never be. She took Marla's house, cleaned the shelves, organized the journals, preserved the stories. She became their keeper, not by duty but by inheritance. Some nights she still dreamt of the tree. But in those dreams, it no longer loomed or whispered. It listened. She would sit beneath its branches, and it would show her echoes, not warnings, but memories, of those who came before, of those who remembered. One evening she returned to the square with Tommy. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the roots. He looked up at her and asked, "Will it ever wake up again?" Eleanor considered the question. "Maybe," she said, "if people forget." He nodded slowly. "Then I won't," he said. And that was enough. The hollow heart had been silenced, not by force, but by story, by memory, and as long as its tale was told, it could not rise. So if you've listened this far, if you've followed Eleanor's path through mist and memory, then you're part of that story now, and it matters. If this tale stirred something in you, subscribe for more stories where the strange meets the true, and legends leave their roots in your mind. And don't forget, click the video now on screen to uncover the next mystery waiting just beneath the surface.